On the distant planet of Zithera, a world of floating cities and glowing oceans, humans were still considered unusual visitors. The planet's skies shimmered with auroras of violet and gold, and the air was thick with a faint hum of energy from the magnetic fields that kept the cities aloft. Captain Ethan Vale, a young human diplomat from Earth, had spent months navigating the customs and politics of the Lyrian civilization. The Lyrians were elegant, silver-skinned beings, taller than most humans, with eyes that reflected starlight. They were highly intelligent, disciplined, and had mastered technology and psychic abilities far beyond what humanity had yet achieved. Ethan had arrived on Zithera with a mission that balanced on the edge of diplomacy and curiosity. He was here to foster trust between humans and Lyrians, to prove that humanity could be a valuable ally in this sector of space. Most of the Lyrians were skeptical of humans, seeing them as impulsive, emotional, and sometimes reckless. But Ethan had learned that patience, respect, and quiet confidence could bridge even the deepest cultural divides. The royal palace of Zithera was a breathtaking structure, a combination of crystal and flowing metal, hovering above a lake of luminous liquid. It was here that the Lyrian princess, Seraphine, had recently given birth to her first child. The birth of a royal heir was always an event of immense importance, drawing attention from nobles, scholars, and representatives of allied species. Yet there was a peculiar difficulty with this child. Unlike human infants, Lyrian newborns were extremely sensitive to external energies and emotions. Any sudden movement or unfamiliar presence could make them cry uncontrollably, their wails resonating unnaturally through the psychic field the Lyrians maintained around themselves. On the day Ethan was scheduled to meet the royal family, the palace was alive with tension. Servants hovered over the infant, attempting to soothe her with gentle songs, radiant lights, and even the subtle vibrations of psychic harmonics. But nothing seemed to work. The baby's cries pierced the air, a sharp contrast to the soft murmur of the palace and the calm demeanor expected in Lyrian courts. Ethan had been briefed to maintain extreme caution. Approaching the child could be seen as a severe breach of protocol. Yet when he entered the chamber, he felt something unusual, a pull, a subtle curiosity emanating from the infant. He froze for a moment, uncertain of how to proceed. Her eyes, a pale, shimmering green, met his. There was no fear in them, only a sort of quiet assessment, as though she were weighing his presence, judging the nature of his spirit. The room itself fell silent. Nobles and attendants held their breath, unsure how a human would interact with one of their most sensitive and precious beings. Even Princess Seraphine, regal and composed in her flowing robes, looked on with a mixture of concern and curiosity. The child continued to cry, high-pitched and persistent, ignoring the soft coos and subtle vibrations of the attendants. It was clear that no Lyrian method was working. Ethan took a slow step forward, careful to show respect. He lowered his hands and spoke softly, in the universal language that all diplomats on Zithera had learned. His voice was calm and measured, carrying an authenticity that humans often did not notice about themselves, but which aliens could detect immediately. "It's all right, you are safe," he said. His tone carried warmth, reassurance, and a steady confidence. For a moment, nothing happened. The infant's cries continued, echoing unnaturally through the chamber. But then, almost imperceptibly, she paused. Her tiny body went rigid, as if processing something beyond normal comprehension. Ethan remained still, his heart pounding. He could feel the attention of every person in the room, yet he did not flinch. And then it happened. The baby laughed. It was a soft, clear sound, unlike anything the Lyrians had expected. It resonated lightly in the air, a gentle melody that seemed to linger. The laughter was so unusual, so profoundly human in its simplicity and purity, that the palace seemed to shift around it. Attendants blinked in disbelief, their composed masks cracking into subtle expressions of astonishment. The high-ranking nobles murmured among themselves, unable to hide their shock. Princess Seraphine leaned closer to the cradle, her own eyes wide with surprise. She laughed, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "At a human?" "Yes, Princess," Ethan replied quietly, kneeling carefully at a safe distance. I only wanted her to feel safe. I did not intend anything else." The child's laughter continued, small and melodic, almost musical in tone. She reached out with tiny hands, not in fear but in curiosity, as if drawn by the presence of Ethan himself. No one had ever witnessed a Lyrian infant respond to an outsider in this way. The event was unprecedented. It was more than just amusement. It was recognition. It was connection. In that laughter, the room felt lighter, warmer, almost alive. The rigid, formal atmosphere of the Lyrian court, normally unyielding and filled with careful composure, seemed to soften around the simple human presence. Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. He understood in a quiet, instinctive way that something fundamental had shifted. Humans, with all their unpredictability, could reach beings in ways that technology, ritual, or psychic energy could not. A laugh, a gesture, a tone of voice, these things mattered. They mattered more than any formal protocol. And in this moment, the infant had chosen him. The courtiers continued to whisper in astonishment. One elder, an advisor of the royal family, shook his head subtly. "It is impossible," he muttered. "No child of Lyrian blood has ever interacted this way with a human." From the shadows of the palace, another figure watched carefully. A tall Lyrian with darker silver skin and piercing eyes observed Ethan, and the child with a subtle, disapproving frown. His thoughts were unreadable, but his presence carried a sense of tension that did not go unnoticed. Not all Lyrians welcomed change. Some viewed humans as a threat, impulsive and unpredictable, and the child's reaction might disturb the delicate balance of power. Princess Seraphine, recovering from her initial shock, reached out slowly, her fingers hovering near the infant's tiny hand. She looked from Ethan to the child, trying to understand. Why?" she asked softly. "Why does she respond to you in this way?" Ethan shook his head slightly. "I do not know, Princess. I only spoke to her. I tried to make her feel safe. That is all." The child laughed again, and this time the sound seemed to carry more confidence. She cooed, reaching out once more, this time making a small gesture toward Ethan's hand. It was a moment of pure trust, rare and profound. The humans and Lyrians present felt the weight of the moment, understanding that something extraordinary was unfolding. In that simple act of connection, centuries of cultural caution, centuries of careful control seemed to dissolve. Ethan realized that humanity had a unique power, not through weapons, not through technology, but through instinct, emotion, and empathy. This moment was small, yet it carried the promise of something far larger. However, even as the palace basked in this unexpected joy, Ethan sensed the subtle undercurrent of scrutiny. The figure in the shadows was not merely observing curiosity. There was calculation there, a quiet determination to challenge whatever influence this human might have. Secrets older than the Lyrian Empire itself were hidden in the royal chambers, and a laughing child, innocent as she appeared, might awaken them. Ethan kept his composure, kneeling with hands open, showing that he posed no threat. He understood the fragility of the moment. One wrong gesture, one misinterpreted expression, could undo the bond that had formed. Yet the child remained calm, laughing and cooing, reaching toward him with unafraid eyes. The palace, usually a place of cold elegance and careful observation, now felt alive with possibility. Every Lyrian present realized, though few would admit it aloud, that humanity was different. Humans had a way of touching lives, of bridging gaps that the Lyrians had believed insurmountable. And this child, the first heir of a new generation, had made that truth clear with a single, pure laugh. Princess Seraphine, her expression softening, finally allowed a smile. Perhaps there is more to humans than we imagined," she said quietly, almost to herself. Ethan, sensing the moment of acceptance, responded humbly. "We can only hope, Princess, that our intentions are understood." The child's laughter continued, filling the chamber with a lightness that none had expected. And in that laughter, Ethan felt the weight of possibility. Not just for diplomacy, not just for alliances, but for something deeper. The chance to create trust and connection across the vast distances of space, across species, across centuries of skepticism. As the attendants slowly relaxed, the elders whispered among themselves, trying to rationalize what had happened. Some shook their heads, calling it anomaly or chance. Others, older and wiser, sensed that this was the beginning of a turning point. A human had reached the heart of a Lyrian child, and in doing so, had demonstrated the unique resilience and empathy that their species carried. But even in this moment of wonder, Ethan did not let his guard down. He knew that the palace held secrets that went beyond simple diplomacy. Not every Lyrian would welcome this display of human influence. And somewhere in the silent corners of the grand chamber, plans and schemes were already forming, quietly watching the bond between man and child. Ethan remained kneeling, calm and composed, aware that this was only the beginning. The laughter of the infant, soft and pure, was a small spark. Yet in it, there was hope, curiosity, and the unmistakable reminder that humans, though new to the stars, had the power to make a difference in ways that even the most advanced civilizations could not predict. And so, in the floating palace of Zithra, amidst silver walls and glowing lights, history had quietly shifted. A human had entered the chamber, spoken a few gentle words, and brought laughter to the child of a princess. And in doing so, he had begun to write a story that neither humans nor Lyrians would ever forget. The palace of Zithra had returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere was subtly changed. Whispers moved through the corridors like hidden currents, soft and cautious, carrying the astonishment of the previous day. Ethan Vale had remained in the palace under invitation, though he understood that every moment he stayed would be watched, measured, and analyzed by Lyrians who valued control above all else. Princess Seraphine, still astonished by her child's reaction, had grown quieter and more contemplative. The infant, named Lyria after the planet itself, seemed calm now, though she remained unusually alert, her bright green eyes observing every motion with remarkable awareness. Even the palace attendants, experienced in handling the most delicate of Lyrian children, noted that Lyria seemed to respond to humans differently than to any Lyrian caretaker. Ethan moved carefully through the palace halls, escorted by 2 royal aides. Every step was accompanied by subtle observation. The aides, polite but tense, kept a close eye on him, ready to intervene should any protocol be broken. Yet for all their vigilance, there was a sense of curiosity that even they could not conceal. Something about this human, and the bond he had unknowingly formed with Lyria, was different. The day began with a series of ceremonial meetings. Ethan sat among Lyrian leaders, discussing trade, technology, and the fragile alliances that kept Zithra connected to the surrounding star systems. While these discussions were important, Ethan's mind often wandered back to the infant. He could not stop thinking about her laughter, the way she had trusted him without hesitation. In a civilization where even the most sophisticated Lyrians approached children with extreme caution, this was extraordinary. During a mid-morning break, Ethan was led to a garden terrace, a floating platform filled with crystalline flowers that shifted colors in response to the air's vibrations. It was here that Princess Seraphine approached him, her robe flowing lightly in the wind, her expression composed but curious. "You are unusual," she said quietly, though not unkindly. "Most humans, well, they do not understand the subtleties of our children. Yet you reached her. I do not know why, but she responded." Ethan inclined his head respectfully. "I do not understand it myself, Princess. I only tried to be calm, to be present. That is all I know to do with children." Seraphine's gaze lingered on him. "Perhaps humans have something we have forgotten, something simple yet powerful. Empathy, trust, these are not taught here. They are earned in moments like that, and yet it is rare to see it so naturally." Ethan felt a subtle warmth in her words, but he remained cautious. Lyrians were not easily swayed by compliments, and diplomacy required precision. Still, there was a sense of connection forming, small, fragile, but undeniable. Later that afternoon, a council meeting was called to discuss the future of Lyria. The Lyrians had long debated how to prepare royal heirs for leadership, balancing intelligence, discipline, and control of their psychic abilities. Now, however, Lyria's reaction to a human introduced a complication no one had anticipated. The council chamber was vast, its walls of translucent crystal refracting the light of the floating city below. Leaders gathered in silent circles, their faces stern, their expressions unreadable. The topic was delicate. The child's response to Ethan was unprecedented. Could it indicate a potential shift in Lyrian-human relations? Could it suggest that humans possessed qualities that even the Lyrians could not replicate? The discussion began cautiously. "The infant's reaction cannot be ignored," one elder said, his voice calm but firm. "This is not mere curiosity. It is a clear recognition. Yet it is anomalous. Humans should not have this effect on Lyrian children." Another elder, younger and more open-minded, replied, "Perhaps it is precisely because humans are different that she responds. Their instincts, their empathy, their unpredictability, these are traits we have moved beyond in our controlled society. Yet it seems they can reach where we cannot." The debate continued, oscillating between skepticism and cautious wonder. Ethan listened quietly, understanding the weight of their words. The council's deliberations were not merely political, they were philosophical, touching on the essence of life, understanding, and trust. Later that evening, as the sun of Zithra dipped below the floating horizon, Ethan was invited to Lyria's chamber once more. The room was softly illuminated, glowing panels casting a gentle light. Lyria sat in her cradle, eyes wide and observing. She laughed softly when she saw him, reaching toward him with small, unafraid hands. Ethan knelt carefully, smiling gently. "Hello, Lyria," he said. "Do you remember me?" The child's laughter grew slightly, a sound of delight and recognition. Ethan noticed how even the subtle movements of his fingers seemed to fascinate her. He realized with quiet awe that her intelligence and awareness were extraordinary for her age. She was not only reactive, she was observant, assessing, and understanding in a way that humans rarely witnessed in infants. As Ethan interacted with Lyria, Princess Seraphine entered quietly, watching the scene unfold. Her expression softened as she observed the genuine bond forming between the human and her child. For the first time, she considered the possibilities of human influence. Perhaps humans could teach her child qualities that the Lyrians themselves had lost: empathy, spontaneity, and trust, unbound by formal rules. However, not all were pleased. The shadowy figure from the previous day remained at a distance, observing every interaction with suspicion. This Lyrian, an elder advisor named Kale, had long believed that humans were unpredictable threats. Lyria's laughter, so simple yet powerful, challenged his carefully held beliefs. He feared that this child, influenced by a human, might disrupt centuries of tradition and control. Kale approached Seraphine later that evening, his tone quiet but edged with authority. "Princess, you must be cautious," he said. "The child's reaction is unusual. Humans cannot be trusted to shape the future of our heir. One careless word or gesture could have consequences we cannot predict." Seraphine considered his words, her gaze flicking to the cradle where Lyria played. "I understand, Kale," she replied softly, "but we must also consider the possibilities. This human, he brings something new, something valuable. Perhaps it is time we reconsider what we believe about the boundaries between our species." Ethan, unaware of the conversation, continued to engage with Lyria. He noticed small patterns in her behavior, the way she responded to tone, to gestures, to calm energy. It was subtle, but it revealed a level of intelligence and empathy far beyond what the Lyrians had expected in an infant. In that moment, he understood why the council was both fascinated and fearful. This child could change the course of their society, depending on how she was guided. As the night deepened, Ethan left Lyria's chamber with a sense of both excitement and caution. He understood that his presence in the palace was no longer merely diplomatic. It was potentially transformative. Humans had shown that they could reach beyond the barriers of culture and biology, connecting on levels that even the most advanced civilizations struggled to achieve. But he also knew that challenges lay ahead. Kale's warnings were not empty. There were those who would resist change, who would view any human influence as a threat. The bonds of trust he had begun to form were fragile, and the slightest misstep could unravel everything. The following days were filled with quiet observation and subtle testing. Lyria seemed to prefer Ethan's presence, often calming when he entered a room. She would laugh at his gestures, reach for his hand, and respond to his voice with recognition. The palace attendants and council members noted these changes with a mixture of awe and concern. Ethan realized that this bond was not just about affection, it was about influence. Through empathy, presence, and patience, humans could affect beings in ways that pure logic or power could not. He understood that he had to navigate this carefully, respecting Lyrian culture while recognizing the unique opportunity before him. In one session, Ethan observed a fascinating phenomenon. Lyria had been crying, agitated by a sudden disturbance in the palace. He approached slowly, speaking softly. Almost instantly, her cries ceased, replaced by a small, delighted laugh. The attendants and nobles watching could hardly believe it. This pattern repeated several times over the following days. It was clear that the infant recognized something uniquely human in Ethan, something that Lyrians themselves could not replicate. The council grew divided. Some argued that Ethan's presence could be harnessed for the child's development. potentially teaching qualities lost to their own species. Others warned of the dangers, claiming that human influence was unpredictable and could destabilize centuries of tradition. The debates were intense but conducted with careful restraint, as was customary in Lyrian politics. Meanwhile, Cale worked in secret, observing Ethan and Lyria with growing concern. He began to investigate the human's background, searching for weaknesses or hidden motives. It became clear that some Lyrians viewed this as a test, a challenge to the very foundations of their society, and Cale intended to ensure that the influence of humans would not go unchecked. Ethan, unaware of Cale's schemes, continued to build trust with Lyria. He discovered that she responded not only to tone and presence, but also to subtle gestures and patterns of movement. In a quiet moment, he realized that he was learning from her as much as she was learning from him. There was intelligence, curiosity, and emotional depth in the child that surpassed anything he had expected. Through these days, Ethan and Lyria formed a bond that was both profound and fragile. It was a bond that drew attention, admiration, and suspicion. It was clear that the laughter of a single infant had the potential to challenge assumptions, bridge gaps, and even alter the trajectory of interstellar relations. As Part 2 drew to a close, Ethan stood on the terrace overlooking the glowing seas of Zithra, contemplating the days ahead. He understood that the child's laughter was more than a simple reaction. It was a symbol of humanity's capacity to reach beyond fear, beyond control, beyond the limits of even the most advanced civilizations. And in the shadows, Cale watched, determined to test this fragile new connection, to see whether human empathy could withstand the weight of centuries of tradition, politics, and expectation. The stage was set for challenges, discoveries, and conflicts that none could fully anticipate. For Ethan, the realization was both thrilling and daunting. Humans had proven that they could touch lives in ways others could not. Yet the true test lay ahead: how to navigate the complexities of Lyrian society, protect the child, and ensure that this unique connection did not unravel in the face of suspicion and fear. In the heart of Zithra, amid floating palaces and luminous oceans, the story was just beginning. A human and a child had shared a laugh, and with it, a spark had been ignited, one that could shape the future of an entire civilization and perhaps the destiny of humanity in the stars. Days passed in the floating palace of Zithra, yet the atmosphere remained tense even as Lyria's laughter echoed through the halls. Captain Ethan Vale had grown accustomed to the delicate dance of observation, respect, and subtle influence required in the Lyrian court. Every gesture, every word, every breath was watched. Yet the child's effect on the court, particularly on Princess Seraphine, was undeniable. Lyria's simple laughter had softened even the most rigid Lyrians, challenging centuries of carefully controlled tradition. Despite the positive attention, danger quietly lingered. Cale, the elder advisor who had long been wary of human interference, had begun plotting in secret. He understood the child's potential influence and feared what it could mean for Lyrian society. Humans were unpredictable. They had empathy, instinct, and courage, qualities that Lyrians had refined and controlled over millennia, yet humans wielded them naturally. Cale feared that these traits, if allowed to shape the princess's heir, could disrupt the established balance of power. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to spend time with Lyria. Each session revealed more about the child's intelligence, awareness, and subtle abilities. She seemed to understand emotion in a way even Lyrians of her age were not expected to. When Ethan entered her chamber, she would calm immediately, often anticipating his gestures and responding before he could finish a motion. One afternoon, as the soft golden light of Zithra's twin suns filtered through the crystal windows, Ethan noticed something unusual. Lyria, while playing with a set of floating orbs designed to entertain infants, seemed to manipulate them without touching. The orbs hovered higher, swirled in patterns, and even seemed to emit soft pulses of light when she focused her gaze. Ethan's heart raced. Lyrians were born with innate psychic potential, but even in royal heirs, such abilities rarely manifested with this clarity or control at such a young age. It was a subtle display, but impossible to ignore. Lyria's laughter, curiosity, and attention seemed to amplify her power, allowing her to interact with the environment in ways that defied expectations. He approached slowly, careful not to alarm her. "Lyria, look at these," he said softly, pointing to the floating orbs. She laughed, reaching toward him, her tiny fingers extending as if to share the energy she had discovered. The orbs responded immediately, circling her hand and forming patterns that were almost beautiful in their complexity. Ethan could feel the resonance of the psychic energy, a faint hum that vibrated through the room and into his chest. Princess Seraphine entered quietly, watching Ethan and Lyria. Her usual composure softened into a mixture of awe and wonder. She can control the orbs without touching them, she whispered. At her age, this is extraordinary. Ethan nodded carefully, lowering his voice. It's subtle, but she is aware. Her laughter, her attention, it may help her connect with the energy naturally. Seraphine studied the child, a trace of worry crossing her face. But such power at this age, if misused, it could be dangerous, and yet, with the right guidance, perhaps humans can teach her balance as well as control. Ethan felt the weight of her words. He had come to Zithra as a diplomat, but now he realized that his role had shifted. He was not merely observing, he was becoming a teacher, a guide, a bridge between two species. Yet the responsibility was immense. Lyria's potential was rare and fragile. One misstep could harm her or, worse, awaken suspicion that might turn against him. Kale, observing from the shadows as always, had noticed the subtle changes. He had begun speaking to select members of the council, sowing doubt and fear. This human, he warned, has unusual influence over the princess's heir. We cannot predict what consequences will follow. The child's laughter, her calm, and now this, her ability to manipulate the orbs, is not natural for her age. We must act to prevent disruption. Some council members agreed, their faces grim. Others were fascinated, unable to ignore the potential benefits. If Lyria's abilities could be nurtured safely, guided with wisdom from both Lyrians and humans, she could become the most exceptional leader in generations. Yet Kale's words lingered, a shadow over the growing excitement. Ethan, aware of the underlying tension but not its full extent, continued to build trust with Lyria. He noticed that her abilities were not merely psychic. They were tied to emotion, to presence, to empathy. When she laughed, the orbs responded more vividly. When she became anxious, they drifted, unsteady. It was as if her emotions shaped her environment directly, a phenomenon that human psychology only hinted at, but Lyrian science had yet to fully understand. One evening, Ethan was summoned to the council chamber. Seraphine and Kale were present, along with other senior Lyrians. The discussion was tense, focusing on the child's development and the implications of human influence. Kale spoke first, his voice measured but sharp. Princess, this human's influence over Lyria is unprecedented. It may appear benign, even beneficial, yet it is dangerous. Humans are unpredictable. Their instincts, their empathy, these are uncontrolled forces. Allowing him to shape the heir could destabilize our society. Seraphine met Kale's gaze evenly. Kale, do you not see? The human's influence is not about control. It is about connection. Lyria responds because he makes her feel safe, understood, and calm. That is something we have struggled to achieve for centuries. Perhaps this is not danger, but opportunity. Kale's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. Opportunity can be deceiving. Trust alone is not strategy. We must consider long-term consequences. Ethan remained silent, respecting the protocol. He understood Kale's caution, yet he also recognized that fear of change had no place in nurturing potential. Lyria's abilities were growing, and the human influence could provide balance, empathy, and guidance that pure discipline alone could not. Over the following days, Ethan began implementing subtle exercises with Lyria. Simple games of focus, calm breathing, and observation allowed her to explore her abilities without forcing them. He encouraged curiosity, not mastery, laughter, not fear, empathy, not control. The results were remarkable. Lyria's powers became more fluid, responding to intent rather than impulse. The floating orbs danced with precision, patterns forming and shifting as if guided by a playful mind. Observers in the palace could not deny the changes. Even Kale, who had initially been adamantly opposed, began to sense that the child's growth was extraordinary. Yet suspicion lingered. The council continued to debate in whispers, some arguing that the human's influence was invaluable, others warning that dependence on a foreign species was unwise. One afternoon, an unusual event occurred. A minor accident in the palace caused a small energy surge. a brief but dangerous spike in the psychic field that stabilized the floating structures around the palace. Lyria, sensing the disruption, reacted instinctively. She laughed, reaching toward Ethan, and the orbs responded immediately, stabilizing the energy with a precision that stunned the council. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even Kale could not deny what had happened. Lyria, guided by her instinctive trust in Ethan, had acted to prevent disaster. It was proof that the child's abilities, coupled with human empathy and presence, could achieve extraordinary results. Seraphine, her eyes wide, turned to Ethan. "You see," she whispered. "She listens to you, she trusts you. That trust, it can save her and perhaps save us all." Ethan nodded carefully, understanding both the praise and the risk implied. Trust was fragile, and Lyria's abilities were still developing. Yet this moment had demonstrated the unique potential of human influence, not through command, not through authority, but through connection. Kale, still wary, stepped forward. "Extraordinary, yes, but reliance on this human is a risk. Lyria must not become dependent. We must ensure her training is balanced, guided by Lyrian tradition as well." Seraphine considered his words, a thoughtful frown crossing her face. "Perhaps," she replied softly, "but tradition alone cannot teach what this human brings: balance, empathy, instinct. We must integrate both." The council continued their deliberations, but the seed of understanding had been planted. Humans, once outsiders in Lyrian society, were now seen as potential partners in guiding the next generation. And the child, through her laughter, curiosity, and extraordinary abilities, had become the bridge between species, revealing strengths in humanity that Lyrians had never fully appreciated. Yet not all forces were aligned with this vision. Kale continued his quiet opposition, observing Ethan and Lyria with careful attention. He began devising strategies to test the limits of the human-child bond, seeking to uncover weaknesses or vulnerabilities. For every success Ethan achieved with Lyria, Kale sought ways to undermine it, ensuring that the influence of humanity would never go unchecked. Ethan, aware of subtle tension but not fully understanding its scope, focused on the child. He noticed how her laughter could calm anxiety, how her attention could guide the orbs with precision, how trust could shape behavior in ways Lyrians themselves could not achieve. It was a living lesson in the power of human empathy, instinct, and presence. In quiet moments, Ethan reflected on the enormity of the situation. He had come to Zithra as a diplomat, but he now recognized that his role had become much more profound. He was a teacher, a protector, and a bridge. He had glimpsed the potential of humanity to influence a civilization, not through force, but through understanding. As Part 3 drew to a close, the palace of Zithra shimmered under the twin suns, a place of beauty, tension, and possibility. Lyria, the laughing child, held the attention of all who observed her. Her abilities were growing, her trust in Ethan was unwavering, and her potential was limitless. Yet shadows lingered. Kale watched, ever vigilant, planning, waiting, testing. The future of the child, the influence of humanity, and the balance of Lyrian society hung in delicate equilibrium. Every laugh, every gesture, every interaction had consequences beyond the palace walls. And the story, as it had begun with a single laugh, was far from over. Ethan understood that the coming days would test the limits of trust, the power of empathy, and the courage of a human willing to navigate an alien world. And through it all, one simple truth remained clear. Humanity had shown that even in a society of perfection, there was power in laughter, trust, and connection that no rule or tradition could contain. The floating palace of Zithra shimmered beneath the twin suns, golden light, reflecting off crystal towers and the luminous waters below. Yet despite the beauty, tension thickened the air. Kale, the elder advisor, had grown impatient with subtle measures. The child's laughter, her innate intelligence, and her growing abilities threatened his carefully held vision of Lyrian tradition. He had resolved that if influence was to be tested, it would happen now. Ethan Vale, aware that the court's attention had turned toward Lyria more than himself, sensed the subtle changes in Kale's demeanor. The elder moved with a quiet, calculating purpose, observing the child and Ethan without revealing his intentions. While the council appeared divided between fascination and concern, Kale's silent plotting introduced a new element of danger. On this day, a controlled demonstration of Lyria's abilities was scheduled. It was meant to show the council the child's growing precision with psychic energy, using a set of floating orbs. Princess Seraphine had organized the demonstration, hoping to prove the success of the bond between Ethan and her daughter. Ethan understood that this event was delicate. Every move, every gesture, every moment of laughter could influence the outcome, not just of the demonstration, but of the child's place in Lyrian society. Lyria sat in her cradle, eyes bright and curious. When she saw Ethan, she laughed softly, reaching toward him with tiny, unafraid hands. The orbs hovered above her, ready for her attention. Ethan knelt carefully, maintaining a respectful distance, letting her guide the interaction. "Shall we begin?" he asked softly. The child giggled, extending her hands toward the orbs. Immediately the orbs responded, forming intricate patterns, spinning and rising in harmony with her laughter. The council watched in astonishment. Even Kale's eyes narrowed, a mix of suspicion and reluctant recognition of the child's skill. Ethan spoke gently, guiding her without imposing control. "Focus on the movement, Lyria. Let the energy flow naturally." The child's laughter rang clear as she concentrated, the orbs weaving in precise, elegant arcs. The palace seemed to hum in resonance with her power. Then, without warning, Kale activated a subtle disruption in the palace's psychic field. A ripple of unstable energy swept through the room. The floating structures trembled slightly, and the orbs wavered, responding unpredictably. Murmurs spread among the council members. This was the test Kale had been waiting for, to challenge the child to measure the limits of her bond with Ethan. For a moment, Lyria froze. The instability could have frightened her, and her abilities might have faltered. But Ethan remained calm, his voice steady. "It's all right, Lyria, I am here. Focus on me." The child's eyes met his, and a smile spread across her small face. Her laughter returned, bright and confident. Slowly, she extended her hands, the orbs stabilizing in response. The ripple in the energy field began to smooth, guided by the focus and trust she drew from Ethan. The palace, once trembling under the disruption, became calm again. Gasps filled the room. Princess Seraphine's eyes glistened with pride. She stabilized it. "She did not falter," she whispered. "Because of you, Ethan." Kale's expression darkened. He had intended to reveal weakness, to show that the human's influence could not withstand real challenge. Instead, the display proved the opposite. Lyria's abilities, combined with human guidance, had surpassed expectations. She had adapted, responded, and corrected the instability, demonstrating control that few Lyrians believed possible at her age. Ethan knelt quietly, letting the child's success speak for itself. He understood that this moment had broader implications than any demonstration. Humanity's strength, he realized, was not through dominance or technology, but through empathy, connection, and the ability to inspire trust. Lyria had responded not to orders, but to genuine presence, and the result was extraordinary. The council erupted into whispers. Some members expressed awe, others hesitation, still concerned about the implications of relying on a human to guide a Lyrian heir. Kale, his plan undone, retreated into quiet contemplation, aware that direct opposition might now draw attention to his motives. Over the next few days, Lyria's abilities continued to grow. She began interacting with more complex objects, moving multiple orbs with simultaneous precision, and responding to shifts in energy in ways that amazed even seasoned Lyrian advisors. Ethan remained patient, guiding her through laughter and gentle encouragement, never imposing, never controlling. Princess Seraphine watched closely, seeing in her daughter's growth the power of trust, connection, and patience. "Perhaps," she said one evening to Ethan, "we have underestimated the human role in nurturing the future. You do not command her, yet she listens. You do not control her, yet she follows your guidance. It is remarkable." Ethan smiled humbly. "I only provide support, Princess. She is the one who shapes her abilities. Trust is a bridge. That is all I can offer." Kale, meanwhile, continued his private observations, testing the boundaries of human influence. He began introducing controlled challenges for Lyria, small disturbances in energy, minor distractions, and even attempts to separate her from Ethan. Each time, the child adapted, laughed, and responded with increasing confidence. The pattern was undeniable. The bond between human and child amplified her abilities, not weakened them. Some council members began to advocate for a new approach to training Lyria. "Perhaps the combination of Lyrian discipline and human empathy," one elder suggested, "is the future." We can guide her without imposing rigid control, allowing her natural abilities to flourish. Others hesitated, fearing reliance on foreign influence. The debate revealed a shift in thinking, a subtle acknowledgement that humanity offered qualities Lyrians themselves had long neglected. One evening, a sudden emergency tested everything. A structural failure in a floating terrace caused a portion of the palace to tilt dangerously. Objects fell, energy fields fluctuated, and the child's chamber trembled slightly. Panic could have ensued, yet Lyria responded instinctively. Her eyes found Ethan's, her laughter ringing clear despite the danger. She extended her hands, stabilizing the objects and energy with precision that stunned the council. The event became the turning point. Even Kale could not deny what he had witnessed. The child's abilities, guided by human empathy and calm presence, had averted disaster. Lyria had demonstrated resilience, intelligence, and power far beyond what Lyrians had expected at her age. Princess Seraphine approached Ethan privately after the incident. "You see," she said softly, "your presence, your guidance, it has changed everything, not just for her but for all of us. The way you connect, it teaches more than control ever could." Ethan bowed slightly. "It is not me, Princess, it is trust, connection, and patience. Humans have learned to navigate fear and uncertainty. That is something we offer naturally." Kale, observing from a distance, finally spoke aloud in the council chamber. "It is undeniable," he admitted, his voice tight with reluctance. "The child's abilities have flourished. The influence of the human is effective, but it must be monitored. We cannot abandon caution." Seraphine nodded. "Caution is wise, but we cannot ignore the potential. Humanity, as unexpected as it is, can teach Lyria qualities we could not provide alone. Together, we can guide her into the future safely and wisely." The council reluctantly agreed to a new program of combined guidance. Lyria would be nurtured by Lyrian tradition while also benefiting from human empathy and insight. Ethan would continue his role, not as a teacher of control, but as a bridge, offering support, trust, and encouragement. As weeks turned into months, Lyria grew stronger, wiser, and more confident. Her laughter remained a symbol of connection, her intelligence a reflection of careful guidance, and her abilities a testament to the power of trust. She learned to navigate her environment, adapt to challenges, and harness her abilities in ways that amazed even the most experienced Lyrians. Ethan observed with quiet pride. Humanity had proven its worth not through domination, but through empathy, patience, and understanding. He realized that this small, laughing child had become a living demonstration of human value, a bridge between species, a symbol of collaboration, and a reminder that connection often surpasses power. Kale, though still wary, began to recognize that opposition alone could not undo the child's progress. He shifted from resistance to cautious observation, understanding that Lyria's potential required cooperation, not conflict. Even he had to admit that the human influence was unique, valuable, and in many ways necessary. The Palace of Zithra, once a place of strict tradition and cautious observation, now shimmered with new possibility. The council learned to balance caution with trust, tradition with innovation, and discipline with empathy. And at the center of it all, a child laughed, explored, and guided the hearts and minds of those around her simply by being herself. In the end, the story of a laughing child and a human ambassador became legend. Humanity had shown that even in a civilization of perfection, there was power in empathy, trust, and simple connection. Lyria's abilities flourished, guided by a bond that crossed species, cultures, and expectations. The Lyrians had learned that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in control or order, but in laughter, trust, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected. And Ethan Vale, kneeling beside a laughing child who had changed the course of an entire society, understood the true meaning of humanity. Not through weapons, technology, or authority, but through the simple, timeless power of connection, he had helped shape the future of an alien world. A future in which humans and Lyrians might walk together, not as strangers, but as partners, teachers, and friends. The twin suns of Zithra set beyond the horizon, casting golden light across the floating palace. Laughter echoed through the crystal halls, a reminder that even in the most alien of worlds, human empathy could shine brighter than any star.